species. Like, no, it's just a really weedy native.
Where are we going to turn next? Like, where's the next road we're going to turn on?
We're going to go down Sable Palm Road and look at the artificial cavity tree for a red-cockaded woodpecker. And I got a pair of binoculars and a spotting scope for us to get a really close look at that artificial cavity up there. And if we're lucky, we can actually see the bird, but I'd say there's about a 2% chance of that happening.
Artificial cavity?
That's right. Almost all the cavities out here for the red-cockaded woodpeckers are artificial. Because past logging, before we owned it, just, you know, under private ownership, it was logged.
There were no trees with holes in them.
Well, the thing is, they take the trees that you get some lumber out of it, and that's the one the birds like to use.
They need a really old tree with like heart rot inside to make their home.
Now, the one exception too is you'll see some of these the pine trees out here. The trunk's only about this big, you know, but it grows up about 20 or 30 feet, and then it does all the twisting and stuff. Now, it's not very big, but what's you can't see underneath the bark is they got what you call the sapwood and the heartwood. And the sapwood is what's right below the bark, and it's the yellow wood. And then that heartwood is what's kind of red. All right, those really not very thick trees that are flat-topped, they're almost all heartwood inside. There's only a tiny bit of sapwood. Because what these woodpeckers do when they make a cavity, they punch directly through the sapwood, they enter the heartwood, and then just only the heartwood, they drill down into it. Because if they keep hitting sapwood, it keeps getting sap in the cavity. They punch through it as quick as possible, but then the sapwood heals itself. It sort of like gums itself up. But then they'll just keep burrowing down into the heartwood because the heartwood's dead. There's no sap in it, and they can use that cavity, you know, for decades. You know, that bird can die, and there'll be another red-cockaded woodpecker in there in 2 days. You know, it knows when that male's gone, and it's like, I got me a spot now. You know. But the problem is, because of past logging out here, like, you know, no one was concerned about these birds. The past mismanagement of fire out here, like the lack of fire, it lets fuels build up, and then lightning comes and just, you know, wipes everything out pretty hot. It kills those trees because it's too hot even for the fire-adapted pines. So what we're having to do is use artificial cavities, you know, and that's just because those birds need a spot to go immediately. We're already seeing evidence in some of our oldest clusters where there's 4 artificial cavities in you know, 4 different trees, but we've already got 3 other trees that's got what we call starts, where they're punched through the bark, they've hit the sapwood, and they've left it alone because there's like this big indentation. They have to, at some point, there's so much sap coming out, the bird has to stop or it gets gummed up.
They wait for it to heal itself.
Right. Well, I think they tend to leave it for about a month, but they want that sap to get really sort of crystalline-like. It's almost like a chalk. And then they'll sit there and they'll work on it for like days on end. Again, as soon as it gets too sappy, they'll stop, wait a month, and they just do that off and on. So sometimes it takes them, the average sort of quick time for that is about 2 years. Because our pine trees down here are denser than any other pine tree in the entire southeastern U.S. where these birds make cavities in living pines. And so it takes them a long time, and you know, and sometimes it takes them up to 10 years because they've already got a cavity over here. But it's like, well, you know, I got offspring that might need one, you know, and any one of our cavity trees could die at some moment, so I need to have a backup. But it takes them a long time. But so we give them a home right away and a couple other options. But then, like, the instinct to still make them on their own is still there, and we're seeing that evidence now. Especially in the oldest birds. You know, the younger ones hadn't quite figured it out yet that, you know, I need to start doing this, but learning from their parents, watching the other birds do it.
So this is the only area in the country that these birds are, this is their habitat. And the logging almost did them in.
The logging, and I would say both the logging and the past lack of fire. The lack of fire is critical because you think, well, a pine will die if it's not burned, but if the place doesn't get burned fire for 60 years, the cabbage palms totally encroach it. Otherwise, the cabbage palms are already hitting the cavity height, and when birds sense that, they get out because they know that A, it's a fire hazard, B, the things they eat can't live in a place that hasn't burned for 60 years. item, the type of insects they eat, really need the occasional fire to keep the understory grassy. And especially these ants that live on the trees, like, they just can't tolerate no fire for a long period of time. They have to move on, and they hope to find.
They're not fireworks.
Yeah.
68?
Oh, we passed the sable palm, didn't we?
Not 68.
No, it's 78.
78?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm sorry, folks. I was
No
like,
problem.
wondering, I was like, yeah, I think I'm going too far.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. I accept it.
Yeah. One thing I'll point out here is if you look at some of these pine trees, you know, some of these pine trees looks like all the needles are brown.
Right.
So you might think that they're dead or they're going to die. But if I gave you some binoculars, what you'd find is that a branch of needles, there might be a little tiny thing of green needles out there. And that's not needles that just came out recently. These pine needles, one of the ways that the pines are adapted to fire is there's chemicals in the needles that really help the needles burn hot. You know, an idea is like if I'm draped over an oak tree or some nasty vine that wants to climb over me, I can help torch it out. But the only exception is the needles that are right around the growing bud where the branch will continue to elongate. Those few needles actually have a lot more water in them, and they don't burn as readily. Now, if it's a hot enough fire, the water evaporates out, then it catches. But these other needles have a lot less water in them, so that when the heat gets hot enough, the chemical inside them basically ignites into flame. Like the flame doesn't even actually have to hit the needle. Just once this needle's hot enough, it'll just torch up.
I always thought it was sand that caused it to explode.
Well,
Just the
if you
dryness
break
of
the
the
needle and smell it, you would perceive that as sap.
Okay.
But it's really stuff that's in the sap. There's specific compounds in the sap that help it do that. And so, yeah, that's one of the ways pines are adapted to fire. It tries to torch its neighbors out. Because if you don't have fire, like, you know, down here, for our forest specifically, cabbage palms are a problem. But in general, pinelands in the southeast, if you don't burn, the really big one are the oaks. The oaks are a really problem. Not so much here, but as soon as you go to, say, Babcock Webb Wildlife Management Area, oaks are more prevalent, and especially like Sarasota northward, you get something called turkey oak. Man, if you don't burn, those things pop up everywhere. It's a really good firewood tree, so if you ever want to cut some firewood in that neck of the woods, see if you can cut turkey oak on a florist. They'll probably be happy to accommodate you. I mean, they might make you pay a $10 permit fee, but they'll be like, whatever you can haul away in one day is $10 buys you that.
You'll see a pretty cool thing right here. You'll wonder why these birds are flying around like this.
This is a tree swallow mermation.
They're also, I think they're either that or they're feeding on the dragonflies. You'll see all the dragonflies right when we come to this area. There's hundreds of them.
What kind of birds are they?
Tree swallow.
Tree swallows, okay.
See all the dragonflies right in here?
Yeah. So where I live at, you can get like over, I think there's about 1 million of them. It's just amazing. And there's like these little mini tornadoes that come down, because what they do is when they don't have insects, thousands will hit a single wax myrtle shrub and just devour the berries off of it. And it's like a tornado of living birds, and then they'll pick right back up and they'll do their thing in the air. But then they'll touch down and hit another wax myrtle.
And what are you calling them? Tree swallows.
Mermation. That's what my girlfriend said that it was called.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Mermation.
Mermation.
I've heard that for starlings.
Yes, they are. They're native. Starlings do it, and in other parts of the U.S. and the world, like, there's other species that make big flocks like that.
It's like patterns and stuff. It's really incredible.
It's really incredible. Like, I've seen footage of some sort of blackbird. I don't know if it's starling or like literally a blackbird or a grackle, but they thought there was probably like more than 3 million. And like, you know, it's just a camera set up statically.